26.
25 seconds.
24, 23,
22 seconds.
21 seconds.
20 seconds, 19,
18. 17 seconds.
16,
15 seconds.
14,
13 seconds.
12. 11.
10 seconds, 9,
8. 7. 6. 6 what? Copy.
5 seconds.
3, 2, 1.
Hi folks, and welcome back to the Scotch Tracker. Today joining us is Star Trek recurring background actor and model builder Max Cervantes. Is that how you say your last name?
It is Max Cervantes. It's Spanish.
Oh, cool. So welcome to the show, Max, and thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I appreciate it.
I wondered if we could ask, like, the initial question, what your earliest memories of Star Trek are.
Well, I'm probably a bit older than most of you. My earliest memory of Star Trek is when I was very, very little, and I remember seeing the Enterprise flying past on the screen, and it was just, I was like, probably like 8, and I'm like, what the heck is that? And I want more of that.
Cool.
You know, but I didn't really start watching Trek until I was older, when Star Trek was put into heavy rotation as reruns in, you know, like late afternoon, early dinner time.
And how did you get involved in working on Star Trek?
Well, that was through a curious sort of events. I grew up in a little town here in Southern California, about 45 minutes outside of Los Angeles, called Corona. And after I graduated from high school, well, a little bit further back than that, when I was in 3rd grade here in California, they used to test everybody and give everybody standardized IQ tests. And in the 3rd grade, I was tested out with the reading and comprehension ability of a second-year college student. And because of that, I got sent away to a private school run for the mentally gifted children. Basically, so we wouldn't get bored with the regular curriculum for the regular students. And as I got older, and when I was getting ready to graduate, it was about like in 11th grade, my special counselor I had asked me what I wanted to do for my life, and my, you know, because I was really good. I was really very interested in like chemistry and sciences. I was horrible at math, though. Go figure. And I loved theater. I'd been involved in like school theater since junior high school and throughout my high school years. And I told my teacher I loved science fiction and horror and fantasy movies. I'd love to do something to do with that, like with special effects work and such. And so, unbeknownst to me, he set up a meeting. He called MGM Studios here in Southern California, in Culver City to be precise. And he got and spoke with the head of the special effects department of the whole studio, who at the time was a gentleman named Glenn Robinson. And he set up for me to go visit MGM Studios and get to go visit Mr. Robinson. And so on December the 27th, 1976, I and 2 of my best friends were at the front gates of MGM Studios, and we got this amazing tour of the whole studio by Mr. Robinson. He bought us lunch in the commissary. He walked us around the studio saying, oh, this soundstage is where they filmed, you know, X, Y, and Z movie, and over here they did this and such. And Logan's Run, the movie, had just come out that year, and all the sets were still standing. And he showed us all the sets that were still up. They had already disassembled the giant miniature of the city, which was literally 80 feet square. I mean, the Sandman Control Tower building in the model was over 6 feet tall. And he took us to a storage area where they had a bunch of the buildings that they had saved from it that they'd put away in storage. And the most amazing thing is that one of the last things we saw before going back to his office, and we saw Logan's apartment, we saw the ice cave of Box, we saw the new U set. So we saw all these standing sets that had been built on the lot. because a lot of Logan's Run was filmed on location in Dallas and Fort Worth. But we saw the carousel set. It was being disassembled that day. And I asked him about it. He said, well, they decided they have so much stock footage that they shot when they were making the movie. If they should decide to ever want to use more of it, they had plenty of stock footage to use of it because it was so massive. It took up so much room. And we went eventually back to his office, and he sat and chatted with us for about an hour or more. And I finally asked him, because he was telling me all about his career, and I finally asked him, well, what made you agree to see us? You know, I'm just a kid. I'm 16. And he goes, well, from your teacher's description of you, you reminded me a lot of me at your age. He said, you see, I'm going to be retiring this year, but I've spent my whole career here at MGM Studios. And I started when I was only 17 years old. And the first film he ever worked on was Forbidden Planet. So that's a very long time to spent all in one place, and just thinking of all the amazing films he worked on. And because see, he later won 2 Oscars that year for special effects. The first one was for Logan's Run, and then the other one was for having built the giant mechanical arm that you see in the old Dino De Laurentiis King Kong movie. He had invented the technology to build this giant mechanical arm, and he showed me pictures of it because they'd already disassembled it and put it away. And basically, you slid your arm into this glove, this whole big mechanical glove that had all these sensors and switches and such, so that whatever you did with your arm was translated to the giant mechanical arm. And it was remarkable, you know, just remarkable. And so that's what he won his 2 Oscars that year for. So, and from there, you know, I'd always been a big sci-fi fan. My very first convention I ever went to was uh, that same year when I was 16, and that was EquiCon 76, which was run by John and B. Joe Trimble. And from there, you know, I stayed in contact and became friends with them. And I'm still friends with them now. And going to conventions, I started meeting other people who were big sci-fi fans like me, who also worked in the business. And the first person I met in that way was Greg Jean, who's a very, very famous model maker in the effects business. Greg is best known for having built the mothership in Close Encounters. He also built, he was the head of all the effects, the physical model effects for Spielberg's film 1941. And he's just done tons and tons of special effects work. And he took a liking to some of my work I had on display at the convention, and just kind of went from there. And when I eventually moved to Los Angeles, because Greg had said to me, look, it's like, I like your work. For your age, you're very talented, but if you ever expect to work in the business, you're going to have to move to Los Angeles. So eventually, after going to college, I studied industrial plastics. I have a bachelor's of arts degree in industrial plastics and chemistry. I worked my way through college because my parents were poor, and so I had to pay and put myself through college. And I was working full time for an aerospace company down in Irvine, California, at the same time as putting myself through college. And then after I graduated college, I eventually moved to Los Angeles, and I looked up Greg, and he gave me some of my first work. So that's the long story of how I eventually got to Los Angeles and started in the business.
Cool. So, how did you appear in Star Trek?
Well, that's a curious thing as well. You know, everything in the film business is kind of odd because, of course, nothing about it is normal. I think that's one of the things I like about it because, you know, I go to work every day and it's always going to be different. I could not live or work in sort of a office environment when I'm sitting in a cubicle just doing work on a computer or paperwork. It just wouldn't suit me well. And so I had been working in the business for quite some time. And through different people I'd met in the business, as well as through fandom, I met David Gerald. I'm sorry, not David Gerald. I'm thinking of another friend of mine. And he was good friends with Mr. Roddenberry, and he had worked for Mr. Roddenberry as his personal assistant, as well as he pre-read all the scripts for Next Generation to make sure that nothing they did would be contradictory to something they had done in the original series or one of the original actors' movies. And he said, well, because I told him I'd run into him at an event that I was looking for work, that I was between jobs. He said, well, I might be able to get you on Next Generation as an extra, but it doesn't pay much. And you'd still have to go through all the same rigmarole of getting registered with Central Casting, putting in your pictures, making a request to be recommended for Star Trek, and I had to go through all that same stuff. The only advantage I had is that with Star Trek, Richard Arnold was this friend of mine who had done all this. And Richard had put in a request from Central to see me. That was the only help Richard could be. But I still then had to go through the thing with Central, then go be seen by somebody at Paramount to get an approval. And then finally, after all those hurdles I had jumped through, the last thing to get on Next Generation as an extra was to go to wardrobe and see if they had anything that would fit me, because they're not about to make a custom costume to fit an extra. So really the final thing is, do we have something that'll fit this person? If not, oh well, we'll find somebody else that will fit something we already have. um, I'm kind of a big guy, less so then, but they eventually found something that fit me, but it was originally made for a guy who was 6'3", but it fit me through the chest, shoulders, and arms. They had to take up the pant legs and they had to take up the sleeves. But after that, it fit me fine. And from there, I started doing extra work on Next Generation. I started in the middle of the 4th season. That's a picture of me in the hallway from the end of the 4th season, where Worf leaves the Enterprise to go fight with Galron for the Klingon Empire to regain his family's honor. And the first episode I did was The Nth Degree, which is a Barclay episode. It's a really fun one. I like it a lot because it's a big mystery until you get to the end, and then you find out, oh, this is just this alien race's way of wanting to introduce themselves and meet new people without going anywhere. We make them come to us. We have a nice exchange of ideas and information, and then we send them back along their way. So I was on Next Generation from The Nth Degree. The episode that you showed the picture from, where Worf leaves the Enterprise, was also
Redemption.
the 100th episode of the series, and because of it being the 100th episode for Redemption Part 1, they threw a big party and they stopped production. It was a Friday, and they stopped production for at least 2 hours or more, and which is unheard of. They don't do that sort of thing normally because, as they say in the business, time is money. And but they brought out a couple of great big cakes, and there was drinks, and Mr. Roddenberry came down to the set, which you have to understand, he was pretty old at this time, so he didn't get around all that well and didn't come to set that often. But he came to set. Mr. Roddenberry sat in the captain's chair, and everybody came and congratulated him, and they did a big group photo with Gene and all the rest of the cast. And as things progressed, and everybody was having their high and congratulations to Gene, I finally went over myself at a moment when he wasn't busy with anybody, and I went over and I told him how much I loved Star Trek and how much Star Trek has meant to me. And if it hadn't been for Star Trek, I wouldn't be here and be having the career I have doing special effects. And getting to be an extra for me was just like, my 15 seconds of fanboy fame of getting to be here, and experience all of this. And some of my best memories of working on the show were just that they had a small little room off to one side on the soundstage for all the extras to go and sit and wait. A big room full of couches and chairs where you could be comfortable and read and whatnot. But I preferred staying on set just offside and just watching everything, watching what they were doing, how they were moving the camera around and resetting things up. And even you notice things that how the set design drives the filming process. When they designed all the sets for Next Generation, TV is something where you really have to be as fast as possible. You think of it this way: an hour-long show like Next Generation, you're making half of a feature film every 14 days. You are making half of a feature film. That's a lot of work. And to get it done quickly and most efficiently, they design the sets a certain way. Like the bridge, when you look up at the ceiling, you see all that white ceiling, right? And that kind of ribbed frame. All of that white stuff, it's not plastic, it's fabric. And it's fabric for a certain reason that they can then shine all the overhead studio lights through that fabric, and it lights the set nice and evenly and diffused. You don't get a lot of heavy shadows, and it just lets them move about and film more quickly. They might occasionally bring in a little spotlight here and there and a little bounce here and there, but for the most part they didn't have to change lighting setups when they would move the camera around inside the bridge. And the same thing in all the hallways and all the other sets. They're all built with ceilings covered in this fabric so that it diffuses the light, so you don't get all the heavy shadows. But it was I know it didn't mean anything to anybody else, but getting to sit there and say thank you to Mr. Roddenberry meant an awful lot to me.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for joining us also today. Chris and Barbara, do either of you have a question for starters?
Oops, sorry, I think I was muted. I was just about to ask, when you were talking to Mr. Roddenberry, what was going through your mind? Were you nervous at all?
I was super nervous. I was very, very nervous. One, because, normally we're told as extras, don't bother the guest stars, don't bother the cast, because we're literally just meant to be moving, living scenery. We're there to make the place feel full and lived in. I did get to have some nice interactions with some of the cast and particularly some of the guest stars. I remember one day Whoopi Goldberg was working, and I was standing in the hallway just outside of Maine Medical, and there's a lot of camera equipment and such in the hallway. And as big as the hallway looks on camera, it gets really crowded quickly with these equipment cars with lighting equipment and cables and microphones and whatnot. And Whoopi was in Maine Medical where they were prepping to shoot something, and the door between the two rooms, between the hallway and Maine Medical, was open. And I was talking with her assistant, and I was admiring the shirt he was wearing. And suddenly I felt this hand on the back of my shoulder, and my eyes just went wide because that hand then grabbed me and spun me around. And I'm suddenly looking at Whoopi Goldberg, and she looks at me and she points directly at me and goes, did I tell you you could talk to him? Did I tell you you could talk to him? Did I tell you you could touch his shirt? Go ahead, touch it. It's okay. You're nice. It's okay. I'm just fooling. Because I was terrified. I was thinking I was going to get fired. And she goes, don't worry, honey. I like you. If I didn't like you, I'd ignore you. But I like you. You keep being you. So that was very sweet and cute of her. But I the two people I liked hanging out around the most was Jonathan Frakes and Michael Dorn, because they are jokesters. They like to pull a good pun and make a quick joke to help relieve the tension and everything. And the same way with Marina Sirtis. And she was very good at giving back to the boys, as she called them,
Right.
just as much as they like to put out. So to me, it was a lot of fun just to watch them, because I'm thinking to these other people going, you don't understand what you're missing by not being here and watching the process. You can learn so much about how something is done just by sitting and watching and not saying anything, you know? I mean, I've been on plenty of sets before in my career. You know, I mean, I went to set when I worked on Beetlejuice. There's the famous scene where during the climax he comes back and he's wearing the iconic black and white striped suit and he comes rising up out of the floor and he's got the carousel on his head. Well, I built the carousel. And so the next time you see that, just remember I'm lying on the floor underneath that little city model at his feet, and there's a small hydraulic lift lifting him up through the set. I'm laying on the floor because there's a cable going down the back of his outfit, and I've got a small remote control box where I'm turning switches on to make the carousel hat go on cue. So I've been on sets plenty of times. I worked on Masters of the Universe, the live action film with Dolph Lundgren. And the company I worked for, we built all the armored suits for Skeletor's army. It was like 300 suits of armor that we had 1 month to make, and as well as stunt armor. And I was climbing up these stairs to get up to the top deck of the Eternia set, which was a huge set. They built it over at the Culver City studio set. And because the set had these deep pits, they had to raise the set up higher. So I'm walking up these really, really tall steps to get it. And I'm just looking down at the steps as I'm grabbing the hold because I've got to get up there quickly. And I bump straight into Dolph Lundgren. And he looks down at me because he's above me. And I'm looking up at him like, oh, geez, sorry about that. And he goes, oh, that's okay. It's dark in here. It's hard to see. And but for the most part, you know, all my interactions with celebrities on set have been really, really nice. So I'm sorry, next question.
Sure. I just was sitting here listening to you and thinking about, building the carousel and some of your work with plastics. And I was wondering if you had a favorite project that really was inspiring to you that you could tell us about.
Oh, gosh, because there's been so many that I really, really enjoyed. Oh, gosh. Well, a case where my knowledge of plastics and manufacturing techniques really saved the day was when I worked on Starship Troopers. We were bidding to get the job to make all of the armor for the vast numbers of all the soldiers you're going to see in the film. And so I and two of my other co-workers, Bear Burge and Regina Pancake, we had a meeting with the director, Paul Verhoeven, and he showed us drawings of what they wanted, and then they showed us a sort of like a demo piece, something that their people had made based off their drawings. And I was like, oh, this is not going to work. And Mr. Verhoeven was like, well, what do you mean? It's like, well, no offense to whoever made this, but there's no actor who's going to want to wear this for any length of time, because they had made their test suit of armor out of 1/4-inch thick solid sheet rubber. It's heavy, it holds in heat, and it doesn't, even though it's rubber, it doesn't flex and bend. It's like wearing a car tire, you know? And he said, well, what's your suggestion? He said, well, we have a material we use a lot for making our stunt objects. It's a synthetic urethane elastomer, and we can get it as both a foam and as a solid. And I said, I can take your drawings here and I can sculpt it out of foam, and then I'll vacuum form over the foam, which is heating styrene plastic in a jig, and then pulling over the object and pulling the air out, which is why it's vacuum, and it forms the plastic. And then I can take that vacuum formed piece and use that as my mold, and then I will pour the solid urethane elastomer into it, let that set up, and then we'll pour the foam version into it. So now we've got a firm but yet soft and flexible backing. And he said, well, that sounds really good. I tell you what, I'll put up the money and you guys have 1 week to make me a prototype suit. And if we like it, I'll go ahead and you guys get the job to do the suits. So as soon as we got back to the shop, I sculpted out the suit. The quickest way to do something like this, and this is a technique I came up with way back when I first started. I was working on a show called Captain Power and the Soldiers of the Future for Mattel and for Gary Goddard, who later ended up being one of my bosses. But I took flat sheets of heavy urethane foam, and I then, looking at the drawings that they gave me, I changed a little bit of it so it would fit. And then I also had asked him, what size person do you want me to make this to fit? And he looks me up and down and says, well, you're kind of a big guy. Make it to fit you, but also make it so it's adjustable, so we can make it smaller for smaller people and let it out for bigger people. So I did, and sculpted it all out, did the whole process, made vacuum formed over the hard urethane foam sculptures, which I did all flat because, again, these parts are going to be vacuum formed flat, but the material is going to be flexible, so they can be flexed and be bent around the human torso and over the shoulders and such. And so that really helped because it saved money and saved time, which are both of essence on working on movie and TV projects. And from there, I went through the whole process, and we made the suit, the prototype suit. We got it done. We went back a week later. We had a meeting with Paul Verhoeven, and then there was I can't remember the name of the actor who played the lead in that. Anyways, he was there, and so Mr. Verhoeven, I walked in wearing it, and he said, "Oh, that's great! Look at that!" And he liked the way it looked. And I changed some of the design of the shapes that their people had done so it would fit better with the shape of a human body. And basically, the idea of all those raised plates is it was supposed to be like a blade of armor on a tank, so that if a blow hit it, it would explode outward, protecting the person. They never went with it, but it looked good on camera. And he liked it. He said, well, go ahead and put it on him, and he introduced me saying he's going to be the lead. We want to make sure it's comfortable on him. And I put it on him. He immediately started giving me attitude going, well, it doesn't fit right. And I've encountered this sometimes with some guys. They kind of get this, I'm the alpha, you're going to do what I say kind of attitude. And I quickly but gently put him in his place. And I said, well, that's because I sized this to fit me, and I'm bigger than you. Here, let me fix it. And I pulled on the straps around the torso and around the chest and shoulders, and I got it to fit him, very quickly. And he's like strutting around in it. And Mr. Verhoeven said, well, how does it feel? He says, it feels good. It's certainly flexible and everything. And Mr. Verhoeven said, well, good. Do a tuck and roll. Do a roll for me. Let me see what you can do in it, And he did. And he said, drop backwards on your back. How does that feel? And he said, oh, it feels great. It doesn't feel like anything because the inside being soft actually could absorb the impact, and the outside skin being tough, worked really well together. Because in doing so, we didn't have to make specific suits for the stuntmen that were just built for stunt work. Any suit could be worn by either a stuntman or a principal actor. And I must have saved my boss on the project a few $1,000s because we didn't have to spend thousands of dollars in making silicone molds to cast all these parts up. When a mold wore out, we just went and vacuum formed another one. And a piece of vacuum formed plastic is really cheap, and it's quick, and it was easy to do. So that was a lot of fun because it was a challenge, and it was solved. And then after that, I didn't have to be involved in it because I invented the technique and I showed everybody how to do it. And then we hired on more crew to help make all the suits. Because for that, we made like 550 suits of armor. We also, my other buddy Bear, he sculpted up the helmet. And then after the helmet was sculpted, we took mold off of it. And then we sent the mold and the original to a company here locally in North Hollywood to make all the fiberglass copies for us. and then they would come back, and then our people would then do the final finish, installing all the padding for the inside of the helmet and getting them all finished and painted. But it was a huge amount of work. I mean, 550 suits, and they started filming and we weren't yet done, but we had enough suits made. We had a couple hundred suits made that they could start filming, and we just kept making them, and they would go to set as soon as they got done. Every day we'd be sending like 20 suits every day to set till we got them all done. But there's been a lot of really interesting projects. I've done a lot of stuff for Disney, and I'm a huge Disney and Disneyland fan. So for me, it was a lot of fun and an honor to see my work is still there permanently in Disneyland. Way back when they built Toontown in Disneyland, I was still working for the same company for my buddy Mike Moore at Proper Effects. And we got the job to build a bunch of large, oversized, cartoon-shaped musical instruments. As you go through Mickey's house, you exit through the back into Mickey's movie barn. And as you go through the prop house, there's all these props lining the walls. And we built all these wacky, cartoon-inspired musical instruments. The ones I built were a whole bunch of saxophones. And normally Disney is really anal retentive about, here's the drawings, follow the drawings. It has to be just like our drawings. That's the way they are. And this particular art director from Imagineering, he goes, well, I asked him about.
Oh, bummer. Hopefully he'll be back in a second. I was riveted, and I had a follow-up.
Yeah, I was really enjoying
me too.
speaking with him.
I was remembering my visit to Toontown. I think I've been there more than once, but it was a particular trip I took with my mother. Thinking about Toontown, wondering if I remembered the saxophones. I can't bring them to mind, but I do have an image of Toontown, and thinking it's so neat to see somebody who is involved in their work. So anyway, hopefully we'll get them back.
Mm-hmm.
I was remembering recently, I looked up his CV or whatever, the records of, they call it on the site filmography of what he's worked on in Star Trek. And it's basically got everything that he's done on Star Trek. I noticed there's quite a few fan films, fan projects that he's worked on, including, I believe, one as a costumer. That I thought was quite interesting. Yeah.
That's delightful that he's worked on fan films. I was wanting to ask him, and I hope we get the chance, how he discovered that he could sculpt. Personal interest is that I've just begun my journey in sculpture myself, and so I wondered how it was he decided to try, and what made him think he could do it.
And how he's figuring all that stuff out too is impressive. Like, he made it sound like it was the easiest thing in the world, and I'm like, I would not know how to even think of how to build armor like that. Like, it's just, I don't know. It's incredible.
Some kind of technical issues.
Well, it's subspace interference. I think that's what we should start using on our stream.
Subspace interference.
It works every time. Or hyperonic radiation was a new one that I forgot about.
Yeah, can you guys see me and hear me now? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. My phone just did something really weird I've never seen it do. It suddenly shut down, and it said phone needs to cool down. It's like, I've never seen it do that before.
Oh, yeah, I've had that happen once.
Well, anyways, where were we? Oh, yes.
Yeah, we were really enjoying what you were.
We were talking about Toontown.
Yeah, you were talking about the saxophones.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, and so he said, the art director said to me, he says, "Well, you've seen The Simpsons, right?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Make it look like Lisa Simpson's saxophone, and it just has to be X long, like 36 inches long." I don't remember the precise size. So I just went ahead and I sculpted a tool, that's what we call them, to vacuum form over it out of really heavy-duty, thick plastic. There's this plastic that's used a lot in hospitals for making medical equipment, and it's called ABS. It's a very, very tough plastic. So I vacuum formed quarter-inch sheets of ABS plastic to make these saxophones, and I put it all together and had them all done, and they looked wonderful, and they're still there. We made all these different props for Toontown. As you walk through, there's these giant band instruments and these wacky wind machines like what you see on set, and there's these big towers of film cans, and they seem to totter back and forth and look like they're going to fall over. They were real film cans that Disney sent us. We speared them onto a piece of steel rod which was bent, and the steel rod was welded to a plate which was bolted to the floor, and all the steel rods swayed only, but the stacks of cans swayed only because of the way they were speared, so they looked like they would fall over, but of course they aren't going to because they're bolted to the floor. And later I worked for a different company building a whole bunch of set pieces that are in California Adventure in their Cars Land area. We did a lot of the exterior stuff that's in Cars Land. There's the Tower of Tires in front of Luigi's shop. There's all these gas pumps that are in front of Flo's V8. And we'd also won the contract to do about 80% of the show ride interior for the Radiator Springs Racers ride, which is the highlight ride of the of that area of the park. And there's things over in Disney World in the Hollywood Studios park that I built way back when the Great Movie Ride first opened, which is the building. It looks like it's a full-size replica of the Chinese theater here in Hollywood. The original ride that was built in there was called the Great Movie Ride, and there's this great big false lobby to look like the Chinese theater in Hollywood, and they had all these film props and such on display. Well, one of the things that I was asked to build, I had to build replicas of props from the iconic film Wizard of Oz. I had to build a replica of Glinda the Good Witch's wand, the Wicked Witch of the West's broom, and the Tin Woodsman's axe. So it's good to know. It's fun to know that these things I built are in these places on display. But I mean, I've been doing this since 1984, 85, and I'm still working, even now. And even with the advent of CGI, there's still an awful lot of physical stuff that gets done because there are still limitations to CGI. Sometimes it's still easier, faster, and cheaper to build a real model. Just this last week, I can't tell you what the name of the project was. We were building a 2/3 scale miniature of a house. A house. This thing was huge. I have a picture. I can't show it to anybody, but I have a picture of me sticking out of the top of it while I'm painting the roof. And they're going to dump water on this thing, a lot of water. So it had to be built super, super sturdy so that a certain hole in the roof would collapse, letting all this water in, blowing all the windows out from the force of the water. But the walls of the house and everything else can't collapse under the weight of all this. So it's all built super, super sturdy. A few months before that, we were building a miniature of a city that was roughly about 25 feet square. And it's for an upcoming Paramount production. But other than that, I can't really say what it is. They, how they are with NDAs and keeping things secret until it comes out. So I really like what I do. It's a lot of fun. It's always getting to be creative, and you never know where it's going to take you.
Mm-hmm. So regarding your work for Disney, Barbara has a question.
Sure.
I have a follow-up? I'm so jazzed to get to ask you this. I was afraid you'd be gone forever when you disappeared. I wanted to ask you how it is you got started doing sculpture, making models, because there had to have been a moment in your life where you thought, I should try this, and then you did. I think for a lot of folks that they don't ever try. So I want to know how did you decide to try this?
And, I think that's very important, and I'm glad you asked me that because I simply started because I wanted to. If you want something enough, you'll go through the effort of figuring out how to do it. I was raised pretty poor. We didn't have a lot. And so if I wanted something, I couldn't just go out and buy it, but I was pretty creative. And so I would make things. I remember the first little phaser I ever made from Classic Trek. I made it out of a pencil sharpener, and I painted it the right way. And I put some silver tape on the sides and some other little doodads I could find around the house on it to make my little hand phaser. And I loved the old TV show Lost in Space. And I made myself the very first scratch-built model I ever made was a model of the Jupiter 2 I did and when I was only 16. And it was 18 inches across in diameter, and it was made of just stiff poster board, a piece of masonite wood, and some bits of plastic here and there. But yet the doors, the airlock doors, could slide in and out. You could take off the roof to see the interior of the upper deck. You could even fold the landing gear down. It could stand on its own legs and everything. This was when I was 16. I didn't have anybody teaching me. I didn't have YouTube to go watch other people's videos on how to do it. I didn't have a 3D printer to just go, bloop, oh, look, there it is. And if I may digress for a moment, 3D printers are awesome, but being able to operate a 3D printer does not make you an artist. It barely makes you a computer operator. Because I see people print stuff out and they suddenly get this false sense of pride. It's like, I made this. Look at this grand thing that I made. And I'm sitting here biting my tongue, trying to be polite and supportive. But really, I'm thinking, it looks like crap. I can still see all the print lines. And how much time you're going to spend fixing and getting rid of all those print lines. I could have built it from scratch and be done with it already in the time you printed it out. So 3D printing, like anything, is a wonderful tool, but it's not the end all. I don't have any worries of being replaced by a 3D printer anytime soon, because again, it's just a tool and it can't replace what I do. I'm sorry, I forgot the rest of your question.
You pretty much nailed it. I wanted to know how it is that you got the idea that you could do it.
Because I simply sat down and tried, and through trial and error, you learn a lot of things. While I was making that Jupiter 2, I had an accident, and it turned out to be a great accident. So that taught me to never be afraid to experiment, and don't be afraid if you make a mistake, because you can always redo it or something. What had happened is that I had a scrap piece of paper. I was testing out a paint to see whether I liked it the way it looked when I sprayed it on the heavy poster board for the main body. And I had accidentally, after letting the paint dry, I accidentally spilled some rubbing alcohol on it. And rubbing alcohol dries really quickly. So I thought, well, I'll just leave it alone. The alcohol will dry up and it'll be gone. I came back a couple hours later, and the rubbing alcohol did something miraculous. It made the silver spray paint I used look like real aluminum. I was like, oh my God, this is great. So I grabbed a paper towel and I wet the paper towel with more rubbing alcohol, and I rubbed it all over the whole model. And a couple hours later, I came back and it's dry and it looks like real metal. It looked awesome. And it was a mistake. It was a mistake. So I learned, well, don't be afraid of making mistakes. You can always, if it doesn't come out right, you can always fix it. But you might learn something really remarkable from it,
Yeah, good to learn that. I wondered, what your molded building for Star Trek.
Well, we mostly built all the hand props for the show. We didn't really do any model building per se. I'd never built like an Enterprise or other spaceships and such that was used on screen. We built all the special hand props. My buddy Mike Moore, who owns the company, one of my very best friends. I've known Mike since like 84, 83. I met Mike through fandom. I'm best friends with him and his wife and his family. To his kids, I'm Uncle Max, and I left doing extra work because Mike called me. He says, "Hey, we need an extra hand working on Star Trek. Do you want to come work with us on Star Trek?" I said, "Hell yeah!" So I get to leave working Star Trek as an extra and go working on Star Trek, but now building all the special hand props. And I worked for Trek through the the fifth through seventh season of the Next Generation, all of Deep Space Nine, most all of Voyager and Enterprise, and all the other live action movies in between. So I can't even think of how many, God, 100 or more things I must have built for all the different shows.
Wow.
But a couple of my favorites though is that when they switched the comm badge from the gold oval background, which was originally used for Next Gen, and they changed it to the sort of like the gold bar with the slot in it. That was John Eves' new design for it, which was going to be used for the first live action film. For Next Generation cast. I got to sculpt it, and I like working in plexiglass. So I carved the whole original in plexiglass, including milling the slot in the back of it and everything for the bar and everything. And then we took a mold off after we got it done, because it's a long process. The art department people, like my buddy John Eves, I saw he had designed up like 5 or 6, 7 different designs, and then you show it to the production, and then the producers and whatnot, they go through the process going, well, I like this one, I like that one, can we put that together, and blah blah blah, and then they finally come up with final one, and then that artwork is turned over to us, and then we make it, and then they see it, and then it goes through more processes in case they don't like something about it. Luckily they didn't. And then after I make that, we make the one mold, and then we make a whole bunch of that. Then we can make a big gang mold, so we can make a whole bunch all at one time. And then, so they start using it. The funny thing is, even though we built it for the Next Generation movie, it ended up being it ended up being on television first, because they also used it on Deep Space Nine, and with the shortened production on a TV show, it ended up being seen on Deep Space Nine first. Before, I really liked getting to work on the phaser rifles for First Contact.
Ooh, those were amazing.
Yeah, I really liked those. It was such a departure, and I really liked it. My buddy John, he designed that, John Eves, and it's a really, really cool, if I may even say, sexy design.
I agree. Yeah.
But yet again, one of those last minute things, they got changed on it. They suddenly wanted a shoulder strap on it, so we had to change the design of the backstock, which was originally much smaller, and the backstock was originally designed so that it would extend, so you could bring the butt of the gun up to your shoulder and make the rifle longer, like they do with real military rifles. And but they wanted this mechanism now for the shoulder strap. We went out to an auto supply store, Pep Boys, here in Los Angeles, and we must have bought every single seatbelt mechanism we could, and they all had to be the same type so they would fit into the hole we made in the rifle. But that was a last minute change on us, and again, that was another case of me and my coworker, my buddy Bear. We built the rifle in several pieces. He did parts of it, I did parts of it, and then we put all the parts together so we could then mold it as one piece, and then we would cast them up and have the rest of our crew molding and casting and finishing them out, and then they'd come back to us, and we'd have to then put in the seatbelt mechanism in the shoulder stock for all that. And some of them had the scope on top that lit up, but there's one, and we only built one of it for the movie. The scene where Picard is sitting in the briefing lounge and Lily comes in and they have that argument, and he picks up the rifle in anger and he smashes it against the display case window and he breaks all his little models. Well, the rifle that he's sitting at the table working on has a section that pulls out, and he's sitting there at the table working on it with some laser tool and whatnot. That was a one of a kind, and I built that one. So that's really cool, knowing that piece that Patrick Stewart is holding and playing with is mine. But the rifle that he picks up and smashes, that one's a different rifle. That one's a stunt rubber rifle. And that whole wall that he smashes, that's not glass. That's a special kind of plastic that's called candy glass. It's called candy glass because way back in the early days of movie making, they used to literally make it out of candy. They would use sugar. They'd melt down sugar, like making hard candy. They'd melt down the sugar and just pour it flat and make panels of flat candy because it would break through and it wouldn't be sharp, and it was cheap. And so they still call it candy glass, even though it's not made out of candy anymore. It's made out of a very brittle plastic. So that was another highlight for me. But there's been so many. On Deep Space Nine, since there was a lot of alien stuff to begin with, we were, us people as prop makers, we don't get any credit. You're not going to see our name in the credits of a TV show going, special props built by such and such. And so we would do funny little things like hiding our names and things. All of the gold pressed latinum in Deep Space Nine is meant to be seen like a door, upright this way. And it has little weird alien runes down the center. That's how the artwork was given to us. We decided to be cheeky and we changed the alien runes. But if you turn the bars sideways this way, like a credit card, and if you kind of squint and look at it and stare, you'll start to see that there's letters, English letters, but they're just weird and shaped and everything. And so each of us put our names in them. The biggest bar, which was done by my buddy Bear, he put his name and his girlfriend's name on it. So that bar says Bear Dana. The middle-sized bar was done by my buddy Mike Moore, and his bar says Mike Shauna for him and his wife. And then I did the smallest one of the bars, and mine says Max Scott. And Scott was for my first husband. So we hit our names in these things. And a year and a half later, the prop master comes back and he's all upset. He goes, "What the hell's up with these things? You can see people's names on it. We can't have this. People can see." I was like, "Joe," my boss, Mike, goes, Joe, it was Joe Longo, the prop master. He goes, "Joe, how long have you been handling these things up close? And you just barely noticed? Do you think anybody at home on TV can see that?" And you could just see the look wash over his face. And he goes, "Oh, yeah, I guess you're right. Okay." But we would hide our names and initials and all sorts of funny things. The case, the orb arc, the Bajoran orb arc is another funny one. There's that beautiful, like, glowing green jewel in the front of the door. And around it, there's this rim. And again, Mike and Bear were having fun with it because they built the orb case. I didn't work on it, but they carved into it. And it says, on that ring, it says, "Not Indies Arc." And in the rocks, there's these weird patterned rock shapes that are on the top of it. And if you saw them up close, it says, "No Kill I." The message that the Horta gave in Devil in the Dark from classic Trek. There was a Klingon dagger I had to make for the episode where Worf's brother decides to commit suicide over a case of family honor. And I gave that dagger the name the Soul Taker because he's taking his life. He's taking his soul by killing himself with this dagger. And I'm friends with Mike Okuda and his wife Denise. And they had given me a sheet showing all the graphics for the Klingon language, meaning this is A, this is B, this is like a CH sound, and so on and so forth. And I changed all the Klingon glyphs on that Soul Taker dagger. So on the blade, one side, my initials, MC, are carved into one side of the dagger. And this thing's metal. I made it out of T-65 aircraft aluminum. I had 1 day to make that thing. And on the other side was the company's initials, PE, for proper effects. And then on the handle, I carved everybody else who worked at the shop, their initials on the handle of the dagger on one side and the other. And another cute little bit of trivia about that dagger. the ball that's at the end. It's called a pummel ball because you would use it to pummel somebody with it. Um, I was running short on time. It's like 4 a.m. I have to have this thing on set by 7. I'm running out of time. I don't have the time to build the design of this pummel ball that they've drawn up. And I'm just getting frantic. I'm looking around the shop thinking, what do I have here that I can use that looks kind of like it? Because the production will understand as long as it looks kind of like the drawing, they'll be fine. And luckily, I found we had a mold to the top of a bottle, like the genie bottle from I Dream of Jeannie. So I poured one out of the mold. I altered it a little bit, and so the pummel ball on that dagger from that episode is a genie bottle topper from I Dream of Jeannie. Oh.
Yeah. So just a question: how often did that happen, where production said, "Hey, you need to have this thing, and you only have a night, or if you have few hours to get this done"?
Unfortunately, frequently, the Romulan communicator was one of those cases. It's kind of a rectangular bar, and they wear it down on the sleeve of their uniforms, and it looks kind of like an Art Deco falcon. If you were to see one, it looks like the profile of an Art Deco falcon on this bar shape. And it had been a slow day, and it was late in the afternoon. Almost everybody in the shop had already left. It's around like 6, and which is really rare because normally I would be getting into the shop at 9 in the morning and be there till 8 or 9 at night every day, and that was normal. So getting to leave at like 6, that's like a snow day, you know. And we get a phone call. Mike gets a phone call from Bob Blackman's department, the costume department, saying, "Hey, they just gave this to us. Can you make us 5 of these by tomorrow?" And this was also in the age of faxing images. So they faxed us the image. We made copies of it on our Xerox machine. And since I was the only one there who could sculpt, Mike says, "You got to do this." And so I said, "Okay, fine." So I literally, I took the drawing, I rolled out some clay. I used Sculpey, and I made it about a quarter of an inch thick, maybe a little bit less. And I put the drawing onto the clay, and then using a pin or like a nail, I punctured through the paper into the clay, following the pattern of the artwork. And then I gently peeled it off, cut around the perimeter to remove the rest of the clay, and then had my sculpting tools to sculpt out the rest of it, looking at another copy of the artwork. I had it done in about an hour. I poured some silicone. I boxed it up, and I poured silicone over it. And there's another chemical you can add to the silicone, not just the normal catalyst, but an accelerant that will make it go off much faster. But in doing so, the mold will not last as long. But we only needed 5 of them. So who cares? And so I sculpted it in an hour. I boxed it up in about 10 minutes. I poured the silicone over it. The silicone was ready to go in another hour. I poured 5 of them and had them painted in another hour. So I had all 5 of them done, and I started at 6 and I was done by 9 at night. And since at the time I was living in West Hollywood and the shop was out in the San Fernando Valley, I was the logical person to then take them to set. Oh, no, wait, or did they? I can't remember. No. I'm misremembering now. The Soul Taker dagger I took to set because I was going to have to go pass her on my way home. I think production sent somebody the next morning to come pick them up. Regardless, though, I had them done by like 9:30 that night, starting at 6 in the evening, because suddenly they needed 5 of these things overnight. And so unfortunately that happens frequently. On another incident with Deep Space Nine, we were making these Bajoran assault rifles, brand new design. really cool, very, very sexy. I don't remember who did the design. It wasn't John Eves, it was somebody else, another one of the art designers on it, but boy, it was really cool. We got the call on like a middle of the day on a Thursday, I seem to remember. And they were like, oh, yeah, and we need 15 of these for Monday morning. 15 rifles, and they're big, and they've got a lot of detail. And that was another case of, okay, all hands on deck. If you had plans for the weekend, guess what? Not anymore. You don't have any plans anymore. So to do it quickest, I built all the small detailed panels. My other buddy Bear, he started making the main body. Mike made another part of the body. And that way, because we're all working off the same drawing, so we knew everything would fit. As soon as I would get done with the part, I would then turn it over to our other artists in the molding and casting area, and they would then mold it and cast it so that I could then go back making the next piece. And we were just doing this until we got all the parts done, and they got the main body done and molded. And then it was a case of painting and finishing all these parts and assembling all of them. And not only did we have to make 15 of them, but 5 of this 15 had to be rubber stunt rifles so that if they needed to, they could hit somebody with it, or if they needed to drop it, it would be okay. So 10 really good looking ones for close-up work, and then 5 rubber stunt ones, all from Thursday noon till Monday morning. So that also is something that kind of irks me when I see fans talking about, oh, look how great such and such that I built made. Look how great it came out. And I hate it because then I also hear a lot of fans say, oh, the stuff on set is so crappy. Look how it's all beat up and everything. It's like, and we had like less than a week to build that. And then it goes to set and it gets beat to hell because actors aren't really very nice to props. It's an object to be used, it's not a toy to be cherished and put up on a shelf. It's to be used. And so we have to make things in a very short order. It has to be very durable. And sometimes these objects have to light up and do things, or they're made out of really, really, working with clear plastics is great if you have lots of time, but it's a real pain when you don't have that time. I had the Jem'Hadar are addicted to a chemical called Ketracel White. Yep. And they have these funky little glass tubes that they keep it stored in. I made those things, and they're made out of a piece of clear plastic tubing, but I had to make a special jig so I could cut them on a bandsaw so that the angles would all be identical and the lengths would all be identical, because there was going to be shots of them laying all together in a case. So they all have to look identical as if they were manufactured in a factory. Oh, and on top of that, I have to make a stopper that will fit into them, that will really hold liquid, and the stopper was built with a little ring so they could inset an O-ring, little rubber gasket, so it would hold fluid inside them. And then the fluid has to be special because it has to show up on camera. Originally, it was just literally going to be white paint. And at the last minute, I was like, it doesn't look good because it just looks white. It doesn't look interesting. So we changed it out. It's a white iridescent powder. It's a pigment that you would normally add to paint, but it's just the pigment in water. And then we can't just use regular tap water. It has to be distilled water because it's sterile. Because once you close it up, if there's any impurities from tap water or some other source, those impurities can fester and become both deadly, stinky, and it'll change colors inside. So we have to use distilled water because you're going to seal these suckers up. There's a lot of work and thought into making the simplest of things sometimes. I made the helmets for the Breen. Bob Blackman came out to our shop to bring me the drawings for the Breen helmets. And I was like, really? This is what we're doing? And he got this dejected sort of like look on his face, just washed over him, and goes, "Yes, that's what Rick Berman wants, and that's what we're going to give him." This initial drawing was literally a Xerox out of the Art of Return of the Jedi, and he had put a great big Sharpie circle around a drawing of Princess Leia's bounty hunter character named Bausch, and he with a big arrow, and it said, "Like this. I want it like this." So that's the explanation why the Breen's helmets look like Bausch's helmet from Return of the Jedi, because that's what Rick Berman wanted. And when you're the head, you give that person what they want. And I had a week to make 4 of them, and then at the last minute, the day before going to set, I'm told, "Oh yeah, and one of them has to be built so that the person wearing it can be in a stunt fight," and then at the last minute pull it off and go, don't shoot, it's me."
Just super easy, no problem.
Yeah, super easy. Yeah, sure. And then when I went to set to babysit them, and then when I get to set, I find out that the actor who plays Gul Dukat, Mark Anselmo, he was very. I'm sorry.
Alimo.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm never sure how to pronounce it. Yeah,
I'm not either, and I met the man. And he was very shy and embarrassed to admit the fact that he was claustrophobic. He's under all this rubber makeup, and he's claustrophobic. But he said it's the rubber doesn't bother him, all the appliance work doesn't bother him. He doesn't like having something over his face.
Right.
So as I would put the face mask on, very last thing before they start working, before they start filming, and as soon as they called cut, I then had to take it off of him just as quickly because the poor guy was claustrophobic, and and the thing has lights. I mean, that rod of light up in the upper portion of the helmet, that's a miniature neon tube inside that helmet, and it's being run by a 9-volt battery and all this stuff that goes into it, and having to pad them out so it fits the person who's going to wear it right. It's just an astounding amount of work, and you have to get it done really, really quickly.
Yeah, and so intricate and stuff. Yeah, I wondered if we could discuss your appearance in Star Trek 6.
Oh yes, well that was interesting as well because they went on hiatus for season 4 for Next Generation, and the gentleman at Central Casting, who basically oversaw all of us extras on set, said, "Well, you know what? They're going to be doing this live-action Trek movie during the summer hiatus. Since you guys are already familiar with the Star Trek production and where everything is and everything, and they're familiar with you, if you want, I can put you as an extra on Star Trek 6. And I'm like, yes, please. And so I had to go have a fitting. That's how, when I found out that I was going to be wearing that red engineering jumpsuit, which I was like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. Because as you might be able to tell from behind me, I'm a huge fan of Star Trek, the motion picture. And those jumpsuits, those engineering jumpsuits were made for Star Trek, the motion picture. And they were still using them through all this time. And I was going to get to wear one. And then when we went for filming that day, they'd taken over one of the sound stages as like a big wardrobe and makeup area for all the extras, because there's so many extras being used. That was one of the things I really like about working the way that Nicholas Myers, the director, works. He likes using lots of extras because it makes the place look lived and real. And he's so awesome. It's like, I've never seen a director who he would ask you your name and he instantly would remember it. I mean, I only told him my name once, and he would say, "Okay, Max, I want you to take half a step to your right and stay there." And he was that way with everybody, all the extras. It was amazing. And to me, that really shows how much he cares to treat you like a real person, not just like a piece of moving scenery, that he bothers to learn your name and everything. So that morning, I'm in this big wardrobe area getting dressed, and Michael Dorn comes in. It's probably like around 10 by this time, because they weren't going to need us extras till like about 11 or so. And I'm getting dressed, and Michael Dorn comes in to get dressed because he's going to be playing Worf's grandfather, who is the lawyer defending Kirk and McCoy. And he comes over and he sees me, and he walks by. He goes, "Hey, Max, how you doing?" And I wave back. All the extras suddenly stop, and they all turn at me and look at me like, "Well, who the hell are you that a principal came over and stopped to say hi to you?" And I kind of was a little sheepish, and I had to explain to the other people, like, I've been working on the Next Generation as an extra, and he was just being nice and polite because he recognized me. You know, most of the times when I was on Next Gen, I would be either in 10 Forward, lounging about, having drinks, or in engineering, or many times I was up on the bridge standing at the engineering substation, which is right behind Wharf. So Michael Dorn would see me a lot when I was there. So he was just being polite and nice. But
Yeah.
that it was weird because then we eventually went to set and we were shooting in the engineering department, which was the engineering department from Next Gen. They didn't even bother to try and retro dress it to make it look like the engineering set from the movies, because all of the Next Generation sets are actually the movie sets. When they started doing Next Gen, they took all of the movie sets that had been built for Star Trek the Motion Picture, used on Star Trek 2, Star Trek 3, and whatnot. And they changed the sets slightly, but they are the same sets. Those sets had been sitting on the Paramount lot on Soundstage 8 since 1978, when they started doing the pre-production work for Star Trek Phase 2, which then became Star Trek the Motion Picture. Those sets sat there in that same place until they got altered heavily and became the sets for Star Trek Voyager. And eventually then when Star Trek Voyager went off the air and they finally cleared that set, those two sound stages, 8 and 9, had been used for Star Trek since 1978, 77, to whenever Voyager went off the air. And so we're there on the engineering set, and I'm just standing somewhere, and many times you never know what's going to happen. And the second assistant director is the person who's in charge of basically wrangling all of the extras. And it's that person's decision of where you're going to go. And I didn't get used at all. And then we break for lunch. We come back from lunch. Oh, lunchtime was a cute incident too, because they've got another soundstage, another part of that same soundstage they were using as wardrobe and makeup for the extras. They set up a big bunch of tables so we could all sit and have our lunch, catered, of course. And we're all just sitting there, minding our business, eating our lunch. And Mark Leonard and DeForest Kelly come walking in to say hi. And they sat with us and talked with everybody. They were like, "How are you doing? How are things going?" It was like, this is so awesome. It's so nice of them. They could have just gone and sat in their trailers and been to themselves, but they bothered to come over and say hi to us, and it was so nice and sweet. That was a really fun memory. And then we go back to work after lunch. And again, I told you I hadn't been used at all up until this point. I'm like, well, I got paid for the day, but I'm not sure if I'm going to get seen anywhere on camera. And the second assistant director, she comes over and she goes, "Okay, I want you, and you. Come with me." And she gives us what they call your marks. And the marks are an X of tape that they'll put on the floor. And though you know where to stand. And I'm like, well, this is great, but I'm standing behind the clear black plexiglass wall in Geordie's little office area. And the camera is out there right next to the warp core. I'm thinking, well, I'm not going to get seen here. Until they go to start rehearsing the shot, and they moved the camera. They moved it from where it was, and they moved it around, and suddenly the camera is sitting right in front of me. And I'm like, oh my God, this is awesome. And then they get ready to start rehearsing it, and there was still one pair of marks right next to me that were red. All the rest of them were white. That hasn't been filled yet. And in comes Jimmy Doohan, dressed in his full Scotty outfit, and he takes his mark, and we start to go rehearse it. And you have no idea how hard it was for me to hold in my inner little fanboy going, squee, oh my God, I'm standing right next to Jimmy Doohan. But I have to hold this in, and my inner fanboy is like, oh my God, I'm going to get to see him right next to Jimmy Doohan. And they go to shoot the shot, and it's a complicated shot because the camera starts by facing towards the warp core. It follows one extra as he walks across the set and walks out. He's carrying a piece of hosing over his shoulder, and that guy was also another fan. His name is Scott Heathcote, I found out, and he was another fan, but he just walks out, and the camera keeps tracking around, and then it starts going from extra to extra to extra. And then another guy, and then finally me, and then to Jimmy Doohan. We had to shoot that shot 13 blessed times. The tall, lanky Indian extra next to me, who also had worked on Next Generation. You see him a lot of times. He is Dr. Crusher's assistant in Maine Medical. And he wore blue. Mm-hmm. They told him to stand with his head down and grip back edges of the console that he's leaning against, and that when the camera would pass him, for him to look up. The problem is he has no cue to telling him when to tip his head up. He can't see the camera. He's got his head tipped down. He can't see when the camera is going by. And they finally got a clue about this, and they finally gave him a verbal cue. It's like, okay, up. And that way he would know, because they're gonna dub most of the audio later anyway. But we shot that 13 times to get the timing just right. And so they do it, and they come on me, and then they pause on me, and then they go on to Jimmy Doohan. And everything else was all shot. Everything I was in Star Trek 6 was all shot in one afternoon, all there in engineering. I did come back later for another day's shooting where I was an extra, but you'll never recognize me because I was one of the many Klingons in the courtroom scene where Kirk and McCoy are put on trial. I'm one of the many extra Klingons, and we're all wearing over-the-head rubber masks, so there is no part of my real face showing at all. But again, funny trivia about that, one of my other friends, Dan Dye, he's a very, very tall, big guy. He's like 6'5" and 300 pounds. He's a big, big dude. And they wanted all big guys to be Klingons that would be seen up close with the principals. And so I told Dan how to go about getting registered with Central and the whole bit. He got in. He worked on the movie for 2 months. And every day he had to go to makeup to get a really nice, full, real pro appliance put on for his head and everything. You barely see him in the movie. He works on it for 2 months, and you could barely see him unless you know where to look. You don't see him. It's just one of the weird things about movie making.
Yeah, we just spoke with Eric A. Stillwell, who was also a Klingon in the same scene, in that courtroom scene. One question I was wondering was, even though they were basically essentially apart, did you ever think the two human or human-looking at least characters that you played in The Next Generation and in Star Trek 6: Dawn of the Discovered Country were connected? Did you ever imagine that the one who's in the engineering was perhaps maybe an ancestor of the other one?
Well, I guess that's the only thing one could assume if you're trying to make sense of it all. And then there's another oddity thrown into the fact that Nicholas Myers really likes things to be logical and make sense as far almost kind of from a military point of view. And in the military, everybody wears name badges because think about it, on an aircraft carrier, 400 people or more on board. Not everybody's going to know who you are, and so everybody wears name badges, And so they made name badges for all of us in engineering. We're all wearing these metal name badges, But there was really only 5 different names on them. My particular name badge, it said Dax. DAX. And I can only assume it was done as a joke. So I'd like to jokingly think that I was one of the many past lives of Jadzia Dax. Because my name tag just said Dax on it.
Although
That used
there's
to
also a crewman Dax.
that used to
Exactly.
confuse me so much as a kid. I was like, why are they mentioning Dax? That's not Dax.
Yeah, I know.
So,
It
yeah.
didn't make any sense to me too. But
Yeah.
I can only assume that maybe they did it as an in joke, and that's the
I-
sort of thing that would have happened by the art department.
What makes me feel
But
better?
Dax in All Discovered Country, when they've got the magnetic boots, Dax is like an alien character who's like
Yeah.
got like
Who's
machine
incapable of
feet.
wearing those
Right.
boots?
Yeah, yeah.
And another piece of trivia: those boots that they called the assassins' boots, because the assassins are wearing them, the gravity boots. Those were made by my old buddy Greg Jean. He made the assassins' boots and the assassins' helmets, and so that's
So all
just a little
cycles,
bit
right?
of a little bit more trivia there. But yeah, so it's hard trying to make sense of that sort of stuff. I mean, sometimes you just kind of shrug your shoulders, go, it is what it is, and you can't really make sense of it because you could burn out a few too many brain cells doing something like that,
Yeah.
So, and you just kind of
So-
go, well, did you like it? Is it fun? Don't think about it
Yeah.
too terribly hard.
Yeah, well, we've definitely had fun speaking with you today. Thank you very much for joining us, Max.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
I'm just wonderful. I mean, I was a little surprised at first to know this was going to be live. So I'm glad I had the time to throw up some stuff to make my background a little bit more interesting. I mean, you guys have,
cool.
You've got, isn't that I can't see it too clearly behind you. Isn't that the bridge of the Enterprise from Undiscovered Country?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's
And I like
nice.
you've got the UFP flag. I have one just like that, only it's white with blue. The reverse. It's like the reverse of yours. So
Yeah. Can I beg the indulgence of the court? I have one more burning question that I've been dying to ask and didn't want to get off topic. Is that all right?
I'm fine. I'm not pressed for time. I don't have to be
Good.
anywhere.
So I'm a nerd, as I'm sure nobody has figured out. And I'm actually a beginning sculptor myself and have been, I spent the pandemic learning how to do it. And it occurred to me that I could ask you about the finishes for comm badges and other things where when you buy a plastic something off the internet, it's extremely shiny. I could never put it in a film. It would just be flashing lights everywhere.
Yeah.
What kind of finishes do you put on plastic to make it look like metal? Because you talked a little bit about the rubbing alcohol, but when you made those comm badges, I would really like to know how that finish was done.
Well, that's a lot of fans for some reason seem to be mystified by that, and a lot of that is because on camera, the bright stage lights make things look shinier than they really are. I can tell you as a fact, since I've painted many comm badges in my day, but we used Krylon paint on them, and we used Krylon bright gold and dull aluminum for the comm badges, whether it be the original oval ones from Next Generation to the later ones. It's Krylon bright gold and Krylon dull aluminum paint. And that's it. We don't do anything to them to dull them down. They're just the right, the paint has just the right amount of luster that under the bright camera lights, they look shiny. And I think part of the reason why Paramount allows the reproductions to be made the way they do, I think it's also because that way, anybody who's in the know will know that those are not originals because they are so shiny, and the real ones are not. I've had many people contact me privately through Facebook and whatnot, asking me, "Hey, I have this comm badge. Is this an original?" And I have to tell them, look, without me holding it in my hand and getting to examine it, I don't know if it's real or not. And my usual answer is, does it make you happy? Does it bring you joy? Because if it brings you joy, then who cares? It makes you happy, I mean, if you just want to know if it's real because you then think you're going to turn around and sell it for a lot of money, well, that's just kind of sad and pathetic. And we made hundreds of those things. So, yeah, it might be screen used, but we made hundreds, if not thousands of those things. So is it really all that valuable? Isn't it more valuable in your heart just to know this piece makes you happy? But the different finishes depend on different subjects. A lot of the times we liked using auto paint. We would go to like Pet Boys or AutoZone, and we would buy pre-made rattle can paint because it's really tough. It's meant to take a lot of abuse because it's meant to repaint cars with, and it comes in all sorts of exotic colors. We had color sheets because you know we were friends with a lot of the people from production, and many times I would get a note from, like, say, Rick Sternbach, and he'd say, like, "Oh, this is a Ferengi object, or this is a Vulcan object, or this is a Klingon object," and from that we would go, "Oh, okay. Well, we know what their color palette is like." Klingons, we use Krylon ruddy brown with lots of gold and black, and maybe a little bit of silver here and there for accents. Ferengis, we use a lot of muted orange and green. For the Cardassians, there's a lot of metallic browns and coppers, and so we had a whole color palette, and they gave us a lot of leeway when it would come to what colors we would use because they've got so much other work to do. They can't micromanage every single little thing. So, but also about the sculpting, I I didn't start sculpting till I was actually in the business. I was working for a company called Landmark Design and Landmark Entertainment, excuse me, and they designed theme park attractions. My boss, who owned the company, Gary Goddard, had been an Imagineer, a writer, and he started his own company to do the same sort of thing. And we were working for the Sanrio company, designing a theme park for them. This is back in the late 80s. It's still there. It's called Sanrio's Puro Land. It's in Tokyo, outside, and it's all indoors. It's an all indoor amusement park because it snows and rains a lot in Tokyo. And I was having to sculpt these pillars of a castle to an entrance tunnel, and it's kind of like the old expression, fake it till you make it. And I just looked at the drawings and okay, I guess I got to figure this out. And I just started pushing the clay around, and I figured it out. And I discovered, oh, this sculpting thing isn't nearly as hard as I thought it was. And from there I just kept practicing and got better and better with each time. I
Thank you
think
so
part of it
much.
is, oh, you're very welcome. I think part of it is you just have to look at it, and you just have to sit there and look at it and figure it out. It might take you a long time, depending on your artistic eye and everything. But I always tell people, don't give up on your art and don't give up on what you like to make. You don't have to do it professionally to enjoy it. You know, Sometimes I kind of think, I think I would have enjoyed it more if I wasn't pressured into doing it every day. You know, but thank you all again for having me. This has been a lot of fun. And I hope the audience out there gets a lot of what I say. And if people want to contact me, they can always contact me through Facebook. And it's just my name, Max Cervantes. I also have my own podcast called the Max Effects Podcast. That's MAXEFX Podcast, that they can find on Apple Podcasts and almost all other podcast streaming services out there. And we even have our own Facebook group, the Max Effects Podcast Facebook group. So if anybody out there wants to contact me and ask me questions about stuff, they're more than feel free to reach me that way.
That's awesome.
Very
And
cool.
I've seen you've also got a Twitter page as well.
I do, but I'm not really as active on Twitter, and I also have an
Okay.
Instagram page. I like Instagram. I like Facebook the most because it's very interactive. You get to converse with people more. Instagram is less so, and Twitter is very, very little is interactive. But my Instagram page is Maximas1138. That's MAX, I should say MAXI MASS1138, and it's kind of like I just made it up just because I thought it sounded good, and I post a lot of stuff of my work as well as other personal things of myself there.
Cool. Yeah, it's been great to speak with you today. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been.
Well, thank
it's been
you
really
guys.
fun.
Thank you much. I appreciate it.
Total privilege. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
To your viewers, please remember to like and subscribe to this video. We'll see you next time on the Scotch Tracker.
All right, take care,
Bye,
everybody.
everyone.
Yeah.
Live
Bye.
long and prosper.